CC Michael, host of All Things Alberta, the podcast that knows that Alberta will be better off on our own, and we really don't care what people east of Saskatchewan thinks about it. Let's get after it. Welcome to All Things Alberta. This is episode, what are we on now? 13? 14. I think we're episode 14. Welcome, I'm your host, CC Michael. We got a bit of a different show today. I want to be tackling kind of three things, but one's the bigger one. And what I've discovered as I was getting ready for the show is that this particular topic that I want to address is much larger than what can be covered in one sitting. So this is going to be basically part one of, I'm guessing, at least three parts, and so this is how it's going to go. I want to look at apathy, and especially how it relates to the independence movement. I believe that apathy is one of the major hurdles that we're going to have to get over if we're going to be successful. And not only in an Alberta context, but as I was doing my research, as I was thinking about this topic, I came to realize that it's a very Canadian thing as well. And in Alberta, it's going to undermine the separatist movement if we're not careful. And in Canada, it's going to undermine the Canadian foundations if we're not careful. And so I want to look at apathy as a whole, as basically the main thrust of today's show. I want to also cover a couple other things today. I want to also look at what can happen that I think easily happens to all of us from time to time. And that is, if we're not diligent in the area of what I'll call as an investigation, or just thinking through certain things, certain sides of stories, it's really easy to get caught up in what we can call partial narratives. Okay, especially online, it's terrible. I saw that this week, and then I'm going to wrap up the show basically using the scenario of getting wrapped up in a story, a partial story, is just wrap up with a bit of what we'd call biblical wisdom from the Bible. For those of you that may or may not be biblically knowledgeable, I think you'd be shocked at the amount of what we'd call everyday common knowledge, or wisdom, which is actually very biblical in nature. And so I want to shed some light with regards to, for those people that are scared of the Bible, or you think the Bible's, whatever you might think it is, there is all kinds of what's called wisdom literature in there, and it's wise stuff. It's ancient wisdom, and it's very, very good. So we'll close the show with that today. I have a lot to cover, and so why don't we get at it? All right. So I want to start with apathy and why I even got onto this topic in the first place. Okay, so I'm gonna explain my journey and start from there. My journey in the area of apathy started while I was in pastoral ministry, while I was a church planter and pastor, and essentially what I was seeing was I wanted to know, why was the church apparently, from what I could see, so apathetic with regards to the very things that were supposed to be of utmost importance? Okay, so I'm not wanting to look at or hone in on anything that we shouldn't, sideline stuff, the stuff that doesn't matter. The stuff that doesn't matter for a reason, right? What I wanted to look at, or what I wasn't understanding as a pastor, was how apathetic the church was towards those things that were of utmost importance. That's where apathy, the question of apathy, comes in. So what in the church were those things? Well, number one, obviously, is the sharing of the gospel. We have the good news. We're supposed to be sharing the good news with people that don't know the good news. And so that's how, from an evangelical perspective, that's how people come to know God, and how they get saved, and how it transforms their life and all that stuff. And so it is of the utmost importance. And yet when I looked around, I saw the number of Christians that weren't really keen on sharing the gospel. They would go to church on Sunday and they would listen to a sermonette. Wasn't really a sermon usually, a sermonette. They would use that time for fellowship. Nothing wrong with any of that. But outside of that, it wasn't conducive to the sharing of the good news, which is what we're called to do. The second is somewhat like it, and that is that Christians were supposed to, or are supposed to, I should use the present, we are to seek the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Okay, so those are two huge things that Christians are supposed to be doing. The problem is that the church is excessively quiet, or has been excessively quiet, on social issues, important social issues, namely that of abortion and sexual ethics. Now, before you turn me off, for those of you that aren't religious and you're ready to turn it off already, this is not about Christian ethics. I'm simply explaining how I got interested into what I would call the culture of apathy, and that's where it started. Okay, so if we are supposed to, as Christians, do a couple of very important things as we're called to do, and we're not doing them, that was where the question started. Okay, so I'm not, the show isn't about the rights or wrongs of abortion. It's not that of sexual ethics. I'm just simply explaining how I got to where I am. Okay. When I continued to, so that opened the door to the question of apathy. Okay, and then I had continued of what I would call continued observance of, or in the political and social realm in a more secular context, right? I noticed that this wasn't a church issue. Apathy is not a church issue, but it seems to me to be a Canadian one. We as Canadians are apathetic people, generally speaking. And there are many issues in Alberta and in a Canadian context that should motivate people into action, and yet it doesn't appear to. From where I'm standing, it appears obvious to me that as a society, okay, as Albertans and Canadians as a whole, we're apathetic to almost everything thrown our way. And the question I have is why? Now, there's obviously some assumptions in there, and I want to make sure that I'm being fair to the topic. So here's my assertion. Here's the entirety of what I want to look at over the next 2, 3, maybe 4 shows. Here's my assertion. Albertans and Canadians in general are apathetic people, generally speaking. We're apathetic. Okay? So in order to know whether or not my assertion is correct, let's look first at the definition of what apathy is. This is out of the Oxford, the fancy one, the Oxford Dictionary. Here's what it says. Indolence of mind. Now, I didn't know what indolence meant, so I had to look it up. Remember, I never said I was the sharpest knife in the drawer. Indolence means avoidance of activity or exertion. Laziness. Okay? Indolence of mind. And then, semicolon. Indifference to what calculated to move. I wrote this right out of the, maybe I missed a word. Indifference to what calculated to move the feelings or excite interest or action. So long and the short is, if I were to sum that up, I would say that the definition of apathy is we're too lazy to think or to get off our couch. So the question then follows, what are you, dear listener, dear watcher, what are you willing to get off the couch for? What does a call to action look like for you? And so I wanted to do just a little bit of research in, like, are we apathetic about everything? Or are we just apathetic about some things? So I have to take that Oxford definition and go, okay, so if it's indolence of mind, we're lazy in our thinking, or indifference to move or excite, our interest or action, specifically action I'm looking at here, then the question is what do Canadians get off our couch for? And this is what I've found. Okay, so I'm looking at physical attendance. What are the greatest things where it drew the most people together and not in their homes? Okay, here's what I found. In June 2019, 2 million plus people gathered in Toronto, downtown Toronto, for the Raptors parade. The Toronto Raptors won the NBA championship, and over 2 million people, and it was reported that some of those people flew from all across Canada. One specific story had 3 people from Vancouver flew all the way out to Toronto to attend the parade. Millions of people, 2+ million people. I also looked at Oilers attendance just for last year. Remember, it was a shortened season, so these attendance numbers are going to be overall low compared to normal. I think they were missing 5 or 6 of their last home games. But the Oilers attendance, Edmonton Oilers attendance for 2019-20 was 596,000. Okay. Calgary Flames attendance for the same period, 619,000. K-Days. So that would be Klondike Days. I don't know if they're still called Klondike Days. In fact, I remember hearing something about Edmonton canceling Klondike Days period or something. I don't know if they're still going on. However, in 2019, K-Days took in 700,000 people. Conversely, the Calgary Stampede in 2019 took in 1.275 million people. I looked at concerts. Concerts are a constant sellout in both Edmonton and Calgary. We like our music. So those are the biggest crowds that I've found. And so what is that? What are those things? Those are stampedes, those are entertainment, those are concerts, those are sporting events, those are parades. We like our entertainment. By contrast, so what I was looking for next was, okay, so what kind of, we'll try to find what I would call the negative side, the protests. How many people come out for protests? Here's what I could find in the last year. Protests, the most recent one, there was a few in February of this last year. Protests against the UCP budget. In Calgary, it brought out 1,200 people. All I could find for Edmonton was thousands. Now, what is thousands? A couple thousand maybe? Let's be generous and say 2,500. Okay? 2,500 in Edmonton. We had protests in Ottawa, February 2020, where 500 people showed up. That was the Wet'suwet'en, what do you call it? Support against oil and gas, I guess. 500 people showed up in Ottawa for that one. The year before, in February 2019, we had 200 vehicles. We don't know how many people, but 200 vehicles from primarily central Alberta. And I think they picked up a few from Saskatchewan as they traveled in the cold, cold weather east all the way to Ottawa in protest of the Liberal government's policies on the energy sector. So that was a big deal. 200 vehicles. So here's what I found. General trend. For celebrations, for entertainment of all various stripes, people are not apathetic. They're rather enthusiastic. When you add up all the positive things, what we would call positive things, I think that's fair, what people will spend their time and their money and more importantly their the actual physical attendance, meaning getting your rear end off the couch and out of the house, and going and actually actively participating in, it seems to be entertainment oriented. We are very interested in our entertainment. Now, I don't think that's anyone's surprise, but when you're looking at apathy, there are reasons behind the apathy. And I think the number one reason behind our apathy here in Canada and Alberta especially is entertainment. So I wanted to dig more into the entertainment aspect, about what that means, what it looks like, and I was rather not surprised, but at the same time, anytime you start digging in and doing research into some of this stuff, the numbers kind of jump out at you, and they did here. So let me go through a couple of things. So when I'm talking entertainment, it's clear that when we look at the sheer numbers of people that when we're going to get off the proverbial couch, entertainment in our province is absolutely a leading candidate for the reasons why we do so. And it appears to be that we are pretty apathetic with regards to almost every other area of life, whether it be politics or otherwise. We might be good at moaning and complaining, but when it actually comes to doing something about it, can't be interested. So, what areas does it look like that we are wasting our time in? Not wasting our time. I don't want to put it that way. Entertainment is important. Okay, I like watching sports. I like going to sporting events. I like my entertainment. Okay, so I'm not. This is the pot calling the kettle black. All right, let me get that out there. First of all, TV. Did you know that the average Canadian watched 27 hours of traditional TV per week in 2017? So this comes right from the CRTC website. They saw 27 hours a week average on traditional TV. They also said that you can add another 3.4 hours of internet TV per week. Now, I think from 2017 to today, that internet hours have jumped significantly. I think far more people are binge watching Netflix and Crave and Disney and Hulu or whatever else is out there. People are binge watching like crazy. I have binge watched like crazy. I think the last thing we just finished watching was 139.5 hours of The Big Bang Theory. I love The Big Bang. It's a funny show. However, in the last episode, they mentioned 139.5 hours. And when you watch the extras, because we had to spend time watching the extras, they explained that line actually comes from the amount of TV hours people have watching The Big Bang. So by the time you've watched episode 1 through episode 200 and whatever it was, you've watched 139.5 hours of Big Bang. Now, that's just one show. And we did it. This household did it. All right? So we're guilty as charged. So from 2017, which is, like I said, I think it's low now, it averages out to 4.5 hours a day of TV watching. That is TV watching only. Now, what else do we get caught up doing in a day? Social media. In 2019, the average Canadian was on their social media for 2.5 hours a day. Are you doing the math with me? Because I'm not done yet. Also, on top of that, outside of social media, people spend on average 1 hour a day on the internet, whatever that means. So I haven't even looked up gaming or anything else. What does it mean by internet? I don't know, just a variety of whatever else you might be doing on the internet, whether it's reading the news, surfing the internet, reading some blogs, or whatever it might be. surfing the internet is an hour a day. So if you do the math with me, that works out to TV, social media, and internet, works out to 8 hours a day. The average Canadian is on their screens 8 hours a day. So if you want to assume with me that, and maybe these are generous assumptions, but we're told that most of us work at least 8 hours a day, and then most of us are trying to get at least 8 hours of sleep in a night. When you add that up, that's 24 hours. 24 hours. There's our day. We're awfully comfortable. Now, this reminded me of a quote that I'm going to read to you right now. It is from the book Amusing Ourselves to Death. I'm going to read it for those that are on listening to the podcast. For those that are watching via YouTube, you can see it here. I've pulled it off of Goodreads, and I'm just going to read. This is the introduction, and it's fascinating. It's a fascinating read, okay? So here we go. We were keeping our eye on 1984. When the year came and the prophecy didn't, thoughtful Americans sang softly in praise of themselves. The roots of liberal democracy had held. Wherever else the terror had happened, we, at least, had not been visited by Orwellian nightmares. But we had forgotten that alongside Orwell's dark vision, there was another, slightly older, slightly less well-known, equally chilling, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Contrary to common belief, even among the educated, Huxley and Orwell did not prophesy the same thing. Orwell warns that we will be overcome by an externally imposed oppression. But in Huxley's vision, no big brother is required to deprive people of their autonomy, maturity, and history. As he saw it, people will come to love their oppression, to adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. What Orwell feared were those who would ban books. What Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who wanted to read one. Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much that we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Orwell feared we would become a captive culture. Huxley feared we would become a trivial culture, preoccupied with some equivalent of the feelies, the orgy-porgy, and the centrifugal bubble puppy. As Huxley remarked in Brave New World Revisited, the civil libertarians and rationalists who are ever on the alert to oppose tyranny failed to take into account man's almost infinite appetite for distractions. In 1984, Orwell added, people are controlled by inflicting pain. In Brave New World, they are controlled by inflicting pleasure. In short, Orwell feared that what we fear will ruin us. Huxley feared that what we desire will ruin us. I've read both of those books. Obviously, I would argue that I read 1984 earlier because it was part of my high school English class. There was an obvious fear at the time of communism. We were still scared of the commies back when I was in high school. And so things like 1984 were still prevalent in our schools. We read them. Unfortunately, as a young man who was not necessarily really into literature, I wasn't very interested in 1984 at the time. It was something I had to do, not something I wanted to read. However, even then, I remember much of the book, and I remember how pretty messed up of a vision it was. It was a number of years later, I think even after I was done university, I had stumbled into somebody talking about Brave New World, and so I was into kind of a classics I was into classics at the time. I wanted to catch up on my ignorance of classics. I believe Aldous Huxley wrote A Brave New World back in the late 30s, if I remember correctly. And I remember reading it and being chilled at just how accurate it seemed to portray. I remember after thinking that we've somehow stumbled into a mixture of 1984 and A Brave New World. But it was definitely more A Brave New World than it was 1984. And I believe this is that introduction to that book explains much of what I'll be covering moving forward with regards to the Canadian penchant for apathy. And I do believe that entertainment is largely, probably in my mind, the number one reason for apathy in the Canadian and Albertan conscience. I don't think it's all the story, but it's definitely a large part. So what I want to do is moving forward, I want to expand on the reasons for apathy in the Canadian / Albertan culture. What I want to do next, that'll end the apathy part for today. What I want to do next is talk about something called, I'm just titling Half a Story. This week there were two stories that caught my attention on social media. Both related in that they were both protesters that were arrested by their local authorities. Okay. And maybe these will sound familiar to you, maybe they won't. But the first one, I believe, was in Australia. Certainly sounded Australian. An Australian woman with her young son. I want to say he was probably 4, not 5. He'd be a small 5. He had to have been about 4. Young boy being arrested. And this was a video on social media. It was about 3 minutes long. And what we know from the recording is that the recording kind of started once the woman was in the process of being arrested. Now, it took a while for things to move along, but police were already on scene. They were already talking to her when the video started, okay? By the end, the woman was upset. The child was upset. There were bystanders that were upset. The police were calm. The child was separated, if I didn't say that. The child was separated from the mother. And when you looked at the comments underneath, I remember watching the video, and I did leave a comment. My comment was just one word: sad. Because it is sad. The whole situation looked sad. But when you read through the comments, which you should do from time to time, just so you can kind of see the zeitgeist of the day, see where people are landing. The comments were heavily one-sided in favor of the woman. There were, however, a minority that were in favor of the police. But all comments, granted, I didn't read all the comments, but I would say I read probably 100, the first 100 down the list. The first 100 that I read took one side or the other. I'd say probably 90% were in favor of the woman. They were outraged at the police. The other 10% were in favor of the police, and it was interesting. Anyway, it was sad. The second incident that I want to talk about here was a 3-minute video of an arrest in Edmonton just this last. So I'm recording this on a Tuesday. What is the date? 12th today. So this would have been the 10th. All right. So there was a video of a gentleman being arrested on the legislature grounds on the 10th of this month, May. And the video begins with police questioning the gentleman. So again, we're picking it up midway through or whatever. We don't know how far in. That's the problem. Is the video begins with police questioning the gentleman. There was about 3, maybe 4 policemen all around this one gentleman. He's sitting by himself. on a concrete step. I don't think it was a fountain or anything, but anyway, he was sitting by himself. And the police, well, in this case, the sheriffs, they were provincial sheriffs, then inform him that he's being arrested. He informs them politely that he's not going to comply. The police haul him away. End of video. So he's not fighting when he's being hauled away. He's not fighting. So it's not like the police had to cuff him and beat the crap out of him or anything like that. It's just, I think it was 3 policemen grabbed him by the arms and legs and hauled him away, and he kind of dead weighted it, and that was the end of the video. So when you looked at the comments underneath that one, which they were quick and pretty vitriolic, which is pretty normal for social media, the vast majority were blaming the sheriffs. So my question to all of you listening, and even something that I've questioned myself, was what is wrong with these scenarios? And the answer should be obvious, but it's not. It should be obvious. The problem is that we don't have the complete story, okay? With regards to the Australian woman, I'm going to keep calling her Australian because I'm not sure, but she sounded Australian. All the police sounded Australian. I still don't have, maybe others do, I still don't have all that there is to know about the situation. What do I know about the situation from the video that I saw? The woman was a protester. She was wearing a protest sign, something about know your rights or whatever. Okay? So she was a protester. We do know that the woman had what appeared to be her 4-year-old child with her. We know that. We also know that the woman was arrested, and we know that the child, in the end, appeared to be separated from the mother. Okay? That's what we know. What led up to that? We don't know. What are the laws of Australia with regards to, I believe it was a COVID-19 related protest. Okay? What are the laws with regards to the COVID-19 pandemic in Australia? I don't know what they are. Maybe you know what they are, but I don't know what they are. All you can say from that first video was it was sad. And that's it. If you're looking at the story itself, you don't have enough backstory to know what led up to this entire thing, and you don't know the laws of the land, and we just don't know. But what we do know is sad. Okay? For the arrest in Edmonton, I had one of my listeners contact me asking me if I knew what was going on in Edmonton. They would like more information. So here's the information I have. So I've already shared with you the information that we have from the video. Okay? So here's the backstory of the video according to eyewitnesses that were there. Okay? Here it is. Prior to being accosted by the sheriffs, the gentleman was part of a small group, less than 10. An eyewitness said they think it was a group of about 9, that usurped a rally that was already there. The rally that was there was a group of about 50 to 55 people had shown up for a liberal gun ban rally, and that gun ban rally had been going on without a problem for about an hour. They had 4 to 5 speakers at that point. The organizer made sure that all the people that came to the rally were in groups of less than 15, and even inside the group of 15, everyone maintained their distance. He was very diligent about following the law in order to not have a run-in with the sheriffs that were there. And it went off without a problem for almost an hour. And then this group showed up, this group of less than 10 showed up. And the reports are that they were belligerent, that They came through the group of the liberal gun ban rally that were there. They were not maintaining social distance, and that basically this, I'll call him a young man. I think he's probably in his 20s. I don't know for sure, but this young man came to be arrested that day. That's the other side of the story. Okay, so basically this leads me to the wisdom that we'll call the wisdom of the week, okay? The book of Proverbs, chapter 18 and verse 17 says, "The one who states his case first seems right, until the other comes and examines him." We tend to, as people, think tribally. Whether we mean to or not, we tend to think tribally. We're always looking for a side to be on. And when we view videos online, or when we, it doesn't matter the scenario, when we interpret, or when we see something in which there is an us versus them mentality, we tend to pick a side, and then we view the other side as being evil and wrong. That's our tendency. And it's a dangerous tendency to be in, because not everything is black and white. We don't understand all the ins and outs of what's going on. Now, with regards to the Australian woman, I am not saying she was in the wrong. I'm not saying the police were in the wrong. What we need to say in this scenario is we don't have enough facts, and therefore jumping on either side is what I would call premature. What looks like police bullying a woman is simply an arrest. When you look at that situation, the police actually maintained calmness. When you look at it objectively, instead of ideologically or emotively, people like me, when I first looked at it, I wanted to come to her rescue. I wanted to push the police away and go, "What are you doing? You're scaring the crap out of the kid. What is going on here?" But that's coming from a lack of knowledge. And it's coming from a place of emotion. And one thing we know from the last few years is that we as a society are being pushed into thinking emotively rather than logically and rationally. And so what is a wise thing to do is to take a step back and ask ourselves, do we have all the information? And in both of these video cases, both of these on social media that blew up, the police overwhelmingly were the bad guys. We don't have enough information for the Australian lady, but we did get some backstory of the one in Edmonton. If you would read the comments underneath some of the posted videos, you would think that the police or the sheriffs were there at the behest of the government or AHS to shut down all protest. That anything outside the narrative of what the government wants, that the police were going to shut down. The problem with that is that there was already a rally, a protest going on. And that protest went off without a hitch for an hour until it was hijacked and usurped by this other group. So if the one protest group ran into no issues because they followed the laws of the land and they were respectful to the authorities that were there, they had no problem. They were able to say whatever they wanted to say with regards to why they met. Okay. Where things got out of hand is when people started breaking the law. That's when arrests started. But people didn't know the backstory from the video, and that's one of the. It was pretty shocking to know the other half of the story and yet see how quickly and easily people interpreted what was going on from the video without having the full story. And you have to be careful about that. We have to be careful. Otherwise, we end up in our own minds creating a narrative that's not true. Are you more interested in your ideology? Are you more interested in your conspiracy theories? Are you more interested in cherry picking your evidence to feed your narrative? Or are you interested in the truth? I hope everyone's interested in the truth. We know that's not the case, but we need to make sure that we're not creating false narratives. And so we do that by trying to collect our thoughts. Again, I'm not saying I'm the poster boy for this, but what I try to do before I jump on any bandwagon is to wait a couple of days, make sure I'm calm, make sure I've done some research, make sure that if you give it enough time, both sides of the story end up coming out, and you can analyze for yourself what's true and what's spin. Okay? And so I want you all to think that, keep that in mind, and I want to encourage you to think biblically. Proverbs 18:17. Finally, I don't know if anyone would be interested in doing this. I've been asking a question with regards to the apathy thing that I'm trying to do. Is I'm asking a simple question, okay? The question is what would you be willing to lose your job over? What would you be willing to lose your job over? Okay? This is what I'm trying to drive at. What issue, topic, thing is so important that if your employer said, stop it, don't think that, don't do that, whatever, that you would say no to your employer and you would walk away and you would stand on your principles. This is getting off your proverbial couch and standing for a principle. What principle or principles would that be? If you want to leave your answer to that in the comments underneath, I'd greatly appreciate it. It's part of me trying to I've already asked some people. I've got some interesting answers so far, including nothing. There is nothing that they would do that they would risk losing their job over, just as an example. Okay, so I'd be interested to hear from you. You can leave, like I said, leave me a comment on the comments below this video. You can get a hold of me on Twitter, Facebook, email, ccmichael3520@gmail.com, and I'd love to hear from you. Anyway, that's 42 minutes in. It wasn't quite as long as I thought it was going to be. But anyway, we will pick up part 2 next time, whenever that is. Might even be later this week, folks. So thanks for listening. You have yourself a fantastic week.